two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is the
from WBRN Radio, traveling over the Boston Red Network, the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 23rd of December 2019. Happy Hanukkah to those out there that are celebrating the celebration of lights as we move into the holiday season, and of course the 25th being a Christmas, and a happy Christmas there. And on the 26th we start Kwanzaa, a happy Kwanzaa to everyone also. So we have a number of holidays behind us. We'll be looking at, the New York Times has a very interesting article here, Beautiful, Violent American, the NFL at 100. Very good story here. And we'll get to that. And at the same time, Eddie Murray, the entertainer, comedian par excellence, returned to Saturday Night Live after being away for roughly over 30 years. So Saturday Night Live's not like what it used to be. Of course, you had Eddie Murray there. You had, what was it, Wolfman Jack? No, excuse me. I'm getting things mixed up there. Anyway, Wolfman Jack had a different program, not Saturday Night Live. But again, very interesting situation out there with some of the old programs. And I'm looking at another article here. We'll get to it in a second here. This is by Jamel Bowie about impeachment, and this is a commentary. What we're trying to do is move some of these commentaries around. If you recall that one time we had Peggy Newman here, and of course we have E.J. Dion and various other opinion commentators, pundit types, Karl Rove. So we mix those up a bit. From the right there, we have the people from the University of Virginia. They usually appear on Friday. That's Friday Java. We have them. Karl Rove is usually on Saturdays. We sometimes move these people around. And then we have Uncle Charlie Cook, the handicapper. We have from the Cook Report, we have him appearing, and we also have Amy Walder, who is also at the Cook Report. We're working on a episode from the Los Angeles debate. We'll get it out sometime this week, and we'll do our own recap. There's a number of organizations that have been doing recaps and highlights. We'll do that and highlight some of the various encounters in that debate. Of course, what did signify it was people of color, in a broad stroke, were absent. That is, African Americans, Latinos, all disappeared at one time. But beyond that, on many of the stations, the commentators and presenters there, who they were and from what groups they came, in the sense of diversity. One of the main issues about diversity is if you do not make a demand, there will be no action. And that is what happened in the 60s. We had, of course, Dr. King marching in the streets, and then some of the major corporations after Brown and after demonstrations like IBM started to employ more African Americans. In fact, Senator Booker's parents were employed by IBM and some of the others. But what happened was, after those the entrance of people into that particular situation, there was passivity. Dr. King, of course, had been killed, and there was not the demand out there, with the exception of Operation Breadbasket. Jesse Jackson out of Chicago, he was demonstrating and demanding participation of African Americans in the corporate pie. And of course you had out of Breadbasket also came the Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton. He ran the Breadbasket in New York for Jesse. So there was people there still making demands, but things were cooling off as more particularly African Americans and women started to enter into corporate life, so to speak. But the entrance into corporate life on the part of African Americans was just for the sake of employment, not for the sake of entrepreneurial and wealth building as such. Wealth building in African American communities in the 50s was more than in the 60s, and in the 60s it was more than in the 70s, and then the 80s, and then it became dismal. And when the Depression hit in the 2000s, that wiped out a lot of the wealth, because in the U.S. a lot of the wealth is in home ownership, and people lost their homes through various nefarious schemes involved there. But however, as we look at 2019, we're seeing more and more. Eddie Murphy has his own production company, has had his own production company since he did the movies, L.A., whatever it was, there, and various other things. And his brother was in the production also. So it was a different kind of situation there, but you didn't have the situation today, say, Tyler Perry has, in that he has the largest, actually, production studio in the U.S., down in Atlanta, Georgia, and the only African-American one. And you're seeing more and more people, we'll get to this NFL story, where 74% of the players in the NFL are African Americans. Some of that wealth is being now recycled back into the community. Players investing in housing and various other things that benefit these communities, and in tech companies, etc. So there is a different situation occurring now than there was at one time. One comment on the Iowa race. The Iowa race is still very, very fluid. You have in one of the polls I looked at, Mayor Pippin out of South Bend up by about 3 or 4 points, and then you have Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the three there. Joe Lunchbox Biden is still in that race, and Amy Klobuchar. Now, Iowa is very big for Amy, no doubt about it. Joe Lunchbox Biden, not so much. He, like Hillary Clinton, can basically skip out of Iowa or lose it or win it, and it doesn't make an impact, and go on to New Hampshire. And his plan is, this is Joe Biden's, is to move past the first 2 states and move into Nevada, where he's doing better, and on to South Carolina and set up some firewall, if it's still there, and on to the larger states. So you'll have the big March 3rd sweepstakes. That's when Bloomberg comes in and all of his millions of dollars he's spending. You'll continue to have a fractured race going on there. And where the people of color candidates will stand, we'll have to see how these debates go. The Democratic Party, of course, being criticized for the format of the debates to begin with. And one of the more troubling signs is here is what's happening in Iowa. Because of these, some of the candidates that are peaking, like Mayor Pippin, the Iowa contests, caucuses, are moving more to the right. Yes, you still have Elizabeth Warren there, and you have Bernie. Bernie's very consistent. But the race has always changed. The characters, the issues, the whole topology changes. You have Medicare for all, but yet it is romanced, we'll say, there. So these issues are meant to be just platforms. They're not legislation. So we see that. But the problem is with this wine cave operation of Mayor Petey's and his donors there, the ability to bring that in, and also with Bloomberg. Bloomberg's running ads in Iowa, although he's not in Iowa. But that is to move it more center-right. And so is Tom Steyer's situation. He made impeachment a big one, but some of his ideas are still more center-right, a centrist, or whatever you want to call it. So that's the whole idea, but it's not surprising because Iowa has moved to the right since I first visited there with George McGovern's campaign. It has moved in that direction. The Democratic Party there had pretty much collapsed. That's why Branstad and characters like that, Republicans, have come in to running the state. And then you see these various other characters there, not just the Steve King character, but the evangelical types and various others that were not present there in great numbers in the 70s. So that in itself, you effectively have a much more conservative constituency in Iowa. That is to be noted. New Hampshire is different. It is still rural, but it is still a more of a middle of the roady state. But at the same time, it tends to look to people that are running from New England. So you'll have Bernie there, you'll have Liz Warren next door, and the former governor of the Commonwealth, Deval Patrick. He, of course, is not getting the traction because there are too many other people there that are playing on him. Let me do Mr. Bowie's first here. This is in the Sunday Review of the New York Times, and then we'll do the Washington Post's NFL. Impeachment hurts, and Trump knows it. That's the his article here. The idea that the president thinks it will help him politically is wrong. Just listen to what he is saying. And interesting here, Merry Christmas and Trump. Of course, Trump uses a clench fist. Almost President Trump is almost invincibly acquitted. It doesn't mean impeachment wasn't worthwhile. Trump and Trump alone will be the center issue of the coming election, the core concern for most voters. He's the reason posters are predicting a high turnout. He's the reason voters on both sides are deeply engaged and ready to take action. In that environment, impeachment is the loudest, the clearest message Democrats can send to the electorate. They just don't oppose him because he's a Republican or a conservative. They oppose him because he's unfit. They oppose him because he's a threat to the values and aspirations of the Republic. Yes, this has been a partisan impeachment, but that's the norm. Democrats weren't eager to impeach Andrew Johnson. I'm sure he needs to look at his history. That was doing Reconstruction. Democrats weren't, but the Democrats were not the party of freedom. They had surrendered to the what would later become the Dixiecrats. Nonetheless, Republicans drove the case against Bill Clinton by taking this case now by sanctioning Trump in the strongest and most consequential manner available to them. Congressional Democrats have set the terms for the next election. Will voters affirm shameless corruption, lawlessness, or will they reject Trump's open attempt to subvert the Constitution? A big question, but the question there is, will the voters see it as a subversion of the Constitution? That is a subjective matter, not an objective matter. Arguably, this impeachment is less partisan than it could have been. Democrats could have pressed their advantage to shape the entire terrain of the presidential election. I argued before that they should have embraced a more leisurely process. They should have taken their time to build the most comprehensive case against Trump, calling it as many witnesses as needed and pursuing a contempt of Congress if witnesses refused. The majority support for the inquiry, Democrats could have cataloged Trump's criminality and covered the full scope of his wrongdoing. It would have been a risk. A months-long impeachment might definitely demonstrate the president's corruption and illegal behavior, or it might undermine the Democratic majority, then threaten the fight for the White House. But if the public is at least open to the idea of removing the president for his action, then a slow impeachment would have given the Democrats the time and space to make the best version of that argument. That's the same argument the professor from Georgetown made. There's two sides of that. If they had pursued that, it meant they were pursuing a judicial route. They would have had to go to court, and of course that would depend on which court they literally landed in. Whether it was a favorable court, not a favorable court, then you go to the appeals court or onto the Supreme Court, where Trump has, pardon the pun, the Trump card. Democrats did the opposite initially. The Speaker, Pelosi, didn't want impeachment. She was forced into the process by Trump's egregious behavior. Once committed, she went with a narrow but dramatic investigation centered on the president's attempt to coerce Ukraine into damaging a political rival. It produced 2 articles of impeachment, abuse of power, obstruction of Congress. On Wednesday, the president was impeached with nearly every Democrat voting in favor. There were only 3 that did not. 1 voted present, representative from Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard, and from Minnesota there, and 1 Van Drew from Jersey, but he's now a Republican, so that really doesn't matter. Democrats intended to hold on to the articles until the beginning of next year. Mitch McConnell, the leader, said that he would end it quickly as possible. I'm not an impartial juror. I'm not impartial about this at all. He followed up with a speech on the Senate floor on Thursday, which he blasted Democrats for delaying the articles. Nancy Pelosi has not shipped these articles there as of yet. And when the trial happens, McConnell's goal is to acquit the president in the process as quickly as possible. To do that, there will be virtually no witnesses. Because these things, the longer they draw out, as in most hearings, the more evidence you develop over time, the more openings happen. This is fairly quick because a few months ago he did what he did. Because we've never get a real trial, it's tempting to think this process was a waste of time, but that was a mistake. Impeachment is rare. Impeachment is historic. Impeachment is indeed historic, but in an ahistoric nation as such as the U.S., one might argue that it is not as historic now in 2019, 2020. Now, 20 years from now, you have a different lens we'll be looking at it. It will definitely be more important depending on what happens. Period. It's a scam. It's something that shouldn't be allowed. It's a very bad thing for the country. That was DJ Trump talking on the eve of the House vote. He sent hundreds of tweets raging against Pelosi, Andrew Schiff, the Democratic Party, Mohammed Mabley maybe too. Read the transcript. He said that the impeachment hoax is the greatest con job in the history of American politics. Fake news media. Their party, the Democratic Party, working overtime to make life for the United Republican Party, all that. Anyway, the Republican Party is simply united behind Trump because they have nowhere else to go. And the extreme right-wingers have taken over the Republican Party. But this has been an evolutionary, not a revolutionary situation where the Republicans have moved more and more to the right. This is not Everett Dirksen's party, nor is it G.W. Bush's. So, or Reagan. So in other words, as you move more and more to the right, get more nationalistic, and they have to have the cooperation, collusion, what do you want to call it, of corporate America. Corporate America got the tax cut and of the moneyed class because the money is there. That's what's happening in Iowa now. With all of these candidates they pumped in there to keep the nation no matter what happens. Whether DJ Trump pops up on in January of 2021 or someone else. they will still have it as best they can. Of course, they're obviously swimming against the tide, attacking the process as an election nullification scheme. He insists that it is unconstitutional for the House to exercise prerogative. That's just for somebody that's a dummy. The president who wants to be impeached, the president who thinks to benefit from impeachment, does not behave this way. If Trump is unhinged, it's because he sees impeachment hurts and that it hurts him in the eyes of the public and undermines his case. It helps him in the sense that the Republican Party, their base, and the polling bears this out, have to be united with him at this time. Because they know without DJ Trump, if they, for instance, had VP Pence or whomever, they would lose the 2020 election, because that coalition that Trump built, the House that Trump built, would fall apart. This statement is about the way the impeachment process looms over the next year of American politics. Well, Americans, as soon as this get out, a lot of people now are sick of it, period. And that's what a leader of the Senate, old man McConnell, knows. This is a sad but necessary day for democracy. That's from Senator Bernie Sanders. For this president's campaign, the President of the United States is being impeached, and that is the right thing to do, because we've got to never forget that no individual in this country, certainly not the President of the United States, is above the law and above the Constitution. That was a theme Bedford's Tricky Dicky to head to California. Sanders made it completely clear his conclusion: I'm running for president not just to develop and work on a set of policies that represent working families in this country, not just to take on the greed and corruption of the 1%, but also to change the way the presidency functions. And that is, we cannot continue having a pathological liar as a president. No doubt about that. Sanders using impeachment to underscore the themes of his campaign. He's tying Trump to the broad narrative of corruption and elite impurity, reinforcing the message of impeachment without naming the president or making him the subject of remark. He's showing voters that he's attentive to the central issue of this election without letting it consume his message. A strong one for the election, where many voters will want something to stand against Trump and make a comprehensive case for a new direction. And that is one of the more important things to do. In Battle Creek, Michigan, echoing his Twitter feed, the speech was angry, bitter. He called himself the first person to ever get impeached, and then there's no crime. Well, there is a crime. He attacked Schaaf and this is what we call a flippable, as a pathological liar. Be willing, he told his crowd, it doesn't really feel like we are being impeached. Well, only few have been. It's possible that impeachment is a wash, that acquittal will leave Trump unblemished and energize his supporters instead of benefiting the Democrats. It's possible that relinquishes the chaos, no doubt about that. He wants to fight. His words and his behavior, however, tell a different story. For once, I am inclined to believe what he says. Well, that's a very good situation there. Let me do the NFL. I'm trying to cut down the lengths of our broadcast. This is from the New York Times and the Washington Post. At 100, the NFL has never stopped changing, but few things remain constant, including the league's popularity and brutality. This is on the 19th of December by James Surowinski. Anyway, the NFL looks remarkably spry at 100. The game is still spectacularly popular across bipartisan lines in the United States. An array of problems threaten its future, from how it deals with domestic violence to blackballing of course, the national hero Colin Kaepernick, to the concussion crisis, to a cord-cutting population migrating away from traditional television. But the league remains enormously popular across lines of gender, race, class, and even politics. The NFL games remain pretty much the only thing for high ratings on network TV scheduled. In 2018, they accounted for 34 of the top 50 broadcasts. Popularity is easy to see in economic terms. The value of the average franchise now is at $2.86 billion, as according to Forbes, up from a sixfold in 20 years. Indeed, with the exception of Disney's assorted properties, no cultural production unites Americans the way the NFL does. It may feel as if the NFL has always been this powerful, but for much of its early existence, pro football was a niche of regional sports and didn't take roots nationally until the late 50s. The acknowledged starting point of the game, as we know it today, the so-called greatest game ever played, that was the 1958 championship between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Jets. And of course, the Baltimore Colts don't exist anymore. They're now the Ravens and Giants. When they went to sudden death overtime, while being broadcasted to a huge TV audience, in 1965, the Harris Poll found that pro football had replaced baseball as the nation's favorite sport, and has never relinquished that position. The enduring popularity speaks to the way the game taps into deep and abiding strains of American culture. The NFL appeals paradoxically to both the American variation of toughness and to the Americans' love of organization and management. Walter Camp, the father of the game, wanted to make players exercise equally their minds and their bodies, demanding physical sacrifice, careful tactical planning. Football is the most collectivist of, and that's very important there, sports seemingly at odds with American individualism. Well, American individualism as such is individualistic, but it's ragged individualism. It's not the idea of going back to the woods, etc. It's the Bill Gates idea of individualism. You build an enterprise and then you set it up into a cabal. In other words, a collection of people are businesses with interests there. The NFL has managed to strike a balance between the poles, celebrating teams, combining efforts while elevating individual stats. These days, almost all ways quarterbacks. Now, again, that is a little different. Over the years, the NFL has kept the game in line with sensibilities of the most valued American consumer, an idea that has always favored straight European men, consciously emphasizing the different aspects of the game in different periods. Today, that means focusing on the wide-open passing game, the talents of young and dynamic quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. But in the 50s and 60s, Americans were worried that the post-war boom made the country soft and that they were being eclipsed by the Soviet Union. So football generally and pro football specifically helped reassure the nation that American men were not mollycoddled softies. So hard-hitting players like Ray Nensky, Deacon Jones became stars in that era. League sanctioned documentaries from the era played up the toughness. In 1960, CBS documentary The Violent World of Sam Huff gave fans an inside look at what it's like to play middle linebacker. Huff was the first player to wear a microphone during a play. 5 years later, William Franken's documentary Mayhay on a Sunday afternoon included rookies playing music I forgot about my life when I got in there. Mayhem, I'm sorry, why did I call it Mayhem? I'm not going to worry about what happens to me. It's going to be who destroys whom. And inside football, standard perspective as the league continued to colonize the American image via the NFL films. That was Ed Sable. The company immediately began producing an extraordinary number of documentaries, short subjects, highlight reels, etc. And in 1967, a documentary, they call it Pro Football. For instance, linebackers were described as search and destroy men of defense, and quite a different choice. The commentary at the time when American troops were searching and destroying in Vietnam. The phrase was used again to narrate a sequel of linebackers smashing in quarterbacks with Joe Fonseca, number. And at the same time, the NFL carefully tapped into America's fascination with organization genius, and came Vince Lombardi, instructing his Green Bay Packers for hours on the beautiful simplicity of the power sweep, to Tom Landry's masterminding the Dallas Cowboys flex defense, to Bill Walsh, who at the time was out in San Francisco, the passing game. Ultimately exemplary is the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick, whose success based on cheating seems to confirm the idea that the system ultimately triumphs talent and the players. The fetishization of management has been only amplified in recent years. The league and its many media partners increasingly cater to the inner nerds in many football fans by offering an elaborate dissection of teams, offenses, and defensive schemes, analyzing specific plays with a level of detail once reserved for team film rooms. The NFL draft and even the scouting combined with the major media events, fantasy football. And this is where fantasy football came in. Fantasy football, I'm not certain which. I'll have to check and see which is bigger, fantasy football or fantasy baseball. It allowed tens of millions of fans to think of themselves as general managers. Decades ago, the social critic Norma Chomsky remarked on how much more energy and attention people invested in sports than they did politics, and how surprisingly knowledgeable and sophisticated they were about sports they loved. Nowadays, that is even more true of pro football. We don't cover pro football here at WBRN because of what happened to Colin Kaepernick, but we brought this one out here, period. The NFL's most important move was embracing TV early on. Owners originally tried to limit television broadcasts. They thought the stands would be the money, but the impression made by the 1958 championship game influenced the late Pete Rozelle, who became a commissioner of the league in 1960, and convinced otherwise. The league also got lucky in 1961. Congress passed a law banning the NFL from broadcasting professional games on Fridays and Saturdays during high school and college football season. The passage of the Sports Broadcasting Act focused on fan experience rather than diluting it. With the 1970 debut of Monday Night Football. That's where you had Dandy Don Meredith, O.J. Simpson, brainchild of Roone Arledge. Don't hear much about Monday Night Football anymore. Been relegated almost to the trash can of history because there's so damn many games going on. You can buy NFL packages these days and watch in Baltimore, Los Angeles, Detroit, where you want to go. Even the success of a competitive rebound to the NFL's benefit when the American Football League started in 1960, the NFL, understandably viewed as an unwelcome Lubiter, gave the competition and competitive inflated salaries and gave the best of college players another option for employment. The AFL, which ended up merging with the NFL, that was 1966. Others were more substantive. The AFL offenses were more freewheeling, pass-oriented than the NFL. The success of African-American players on the field, along with the merger past the NFL teams, however, gauging to integrate today, roughly 74% are African-American players. That ends that, and it's very interesting. And it also led to the delusion of African-American players in professional baseball. And because you have so many African-American players that are in the NFL, and notably in the NBA, and the NBA, like baseball, plays many, many games, a very long schedule, whereas the NFL is... football is around, 16 or 17 regular season games, something of that nature. Then they have their playoffs, Super Bowl. They used to have the Pro Bowl. They still have one, but it's not it's somewhere in cable land these days, and that's what the big change has been. There is less programming on so-called ordinary TV than there used to be. A lot of that programming now is with ESPN and so forth and so on, so on cable. In other words, the pay screen is there. Now you do have games that are on, say, Facebook, and even on Twitter. Games are there, a little bit different. So the accessibility is out there. Let me just see if anything else is there. We won't mess around with polling here. Covered that one. Let's see if we get to this. Sometimes we don't get to everything. This is an interesting one here, and the reason I'm covering it is this was a big clash in the debate, and we'll have the debate, the campaign trail clash. Mayor Petey, Liz Warren spills into the 6th Democratic debate. This is by the Associated Press. I think I'll leave this until we actually cover that, the whole situation and how Amy Klobuchar played into that. Pittsburgh, we don't hear from them very much out here these days. And let me just close out here. Well, we're doing pretty good, but I'll close out here with data research on 267 million accounts. I think we covered this before. The UK, Tech website, Comparatech, which the editor there, Biscoff, said that's been helping write up Domanichok's discovery of the unsecured database for about a year. The research provided there 10 record samples with database ID. 2 phone numbers were answered and checked against real Facebook users. The evidence suggests the data was collected illegally, most likely by criminals in Vietnam, who may have scraped it from public Facebook pages, or by someone obtaining privileged access to servers. Scraping is an automated data harvesting done by bots. A small fraction of the database included details on users in Vietnam. A little something different here. Security experts say the affected Facebook user at high risk of being targeted by spam, password stealing, phishing attacks, identity theft, etc. The information can be cross-referenced with physical and email addresses and other data improved here. Now, in September, the news site TechCrunch reported that Facebook ID and phone numbers of more than 400 million were similarly found exposed online by researcher. More and more, the independent researcher is playing a more important role in what's going on out there. We talk about this some on our other program, the Open Source Report, where we get into that usually with Mr. Krebs, the former Washington Post reporter that wrote Spam Nation. We talk about this. What we attempt to do at WBRN is integrate politics with software development, open source, liberated software development, with economics. That's Numbers Man. That's our macroeconomics program. And then we have BR on the World, one of our programs also that covers international events. And the sports program, all about sports, not as many episodes. That will get them over there. So in 2020, you'll see further developments here. We can, of course, be found on iHeartMedia, on YouTube. And when you get over to YouTube, just subscribe. It's the audio version. We'll come with the video version in 2020. Once again, we used to be on live stream where we did have a video version, but the live stream, of course, went through many machinations and got to be too expensive. I believe they wanted to, at one time, $100 per episode. Anyway, the subscription process and podcasting, we've seen the developments in podcasting or in internet radio, whatever you want to call it, that places like the BBC, the big behemoths, National Public Radio, are coming up with more and more of these casts to supplement their live radio broadcasts. You can find all of the stuff recorded on their sites, and they are making new ones, not just keeping the old ones alive there. So next year, and I don't know if we'll get to it this year, to talk about podcasting and the nature of podcasts. Perhaps we'll get to it before the end of the year. Nonetheless, this is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin Memorial broadcast booth on the 23rd of December, 2009. Once again, happy holidays to everyone. Happy Hanukkah, happy Christmas, happy Kwanzaa. Good day.